welcome to my channel. Today I'd like to talk about writing rather than doing a whole how-to video, but we will do those regularly. We will also do the general waffles on writing. It's amazing how many people actually want to write a book, but they're too afraid to start. I say if you want to write a book, just do it. Whether you have a computer that you can use to type it on, or whether you simply have a pen and some notebooks, get it down. Just start doing it. Don't worry about whether you're going to self-publish or traditionally publish in the beginning. If you have a story to tell, that's the most important thing. Just get it down. There are a few things you need before you start writing. Obviously, you'll need pen, paper, computer if you have it. If you don't, just use the pen and paper. You'll need a decent dictionary. As far as I'm concerned, you need a nice paper dictionary rather than only the one on your computer. But if that's all you have, that's fine. I like a good old-fashioned thesaurus as well because they have so many more options than what you get on your computer. So if you can get a good thesaurus, then do it. You'll need to decide whether you're going to write in English UK or English American. People don't really care these days. The few people that get funny about whether you're using an Americanism or an Englishism are really irrelevant. Write according to the language that you most used to writing in. Personally, I write in English UK, and I don't actually write on paper anymore. As you can see, it's virtually impossible to write at my desk because of my assistant here. Even drawing, I have to hide away from him or do everything digitally. But if you can write on paper, then do. In fact, it's quite therapeutic. My first book I wrote with pen and paper, the entire book. That was before I actually had my computer. I wrote African Me and Satellite TV in notebooks, a series of notebooks, and then transferred them onto a computer. But I was incredibly anal with that book. I used to write and rewrite, and every single day I would print out pages. But eventually I got it done. And I got it typed and I got it put on. But I made so many mistakes, which is why I'd like to help people who are just starting out in the beginning not to make those same mistakes. I've also written other books since then, which were a lot easier than writing the first one. I wrote a couple of science fiction books which haven't been published yet, but because of things that have happened in the last couple of years, I'll get to it. Well, the thing with writing is that you never stop. We lived in Zimbabwe when I wrote African Me, and even though I had already written my second book, the country collapsed and the money was worth nothing, and there was a whole lot of violence, and we couldn't stay there anymore, so we left. This is not so very long ago. So we left Zimbabwe and we drove down. We came to South Africa. It was all very spur of the moment, literally overnight. We were there one day and the next day we weren't. We drove down. I'm a South African by birth, so we came to South Africa, left the dog. He went to a good home, thank God for that. We left that country in a big mess and came to South Africa, which, as I said, was much better at the time. Unfortunately, not long after we got here, my husband Angus, there with a blue arrow over there, passed away very, very suddenly, and I had to stop writing because I had to start earning a living. However, that didn't last very long, so I'm back to writing now. So I'm only going to give you 2 pieces of advice when it comes to actually writing your book. Assuming you have some kind of software and a computer that you're writing it on, don't get involved with putting page numbers or worrying about how you're supposed to lay it out if you want to send it to an agent or if you're going to self-publish it. It really doesn't matter. The only thing I suggest is leaving 1 page blank at the beginning for when you do actually format it later on. It's useful to just have that there. And then just start typing. Don't worry about format. Don't worry about your font. Just find a font that you're comfortable with and use that for typing. A lot of people use software called Scrivener, it's very fabulous. It's wonderful. I have used it before, but it's very expensive and it's very precise. I prefer to do everything manually myself. So without being limited by Scrivener's output files and stuff like that. But that's entirely up to you. If you can afford Scrivener and the time to learn how to use it, then go for that. Otherwise, I suggest downloading some free software, which is called All My Notes. You can get a paid version of it. It's very, very useful. I only use the free version, so download that. It's very similar to Scrivener in that you can use it to write different sections. You can have different sections for your characters, for your scenes, anything you want to keep about the book. And it's very important that you do keep information about the book as you write it about your characters. You might forget that your character has blue eyes, and you might spend hours going back to the original or finding the original paragraph where you describe the character's looks. You can put photographs in this program. You can insert tables. You can have different highlight colors for your various characters or scenes or whatever it is that you're wanting to use. Similar to Scrivener, it also has an overview that you can use where you go up to the top where your main file name is, and you can see each different heading is labeled. So obviously, before you begin to write your story, you're going to need to know what your story is about. You need a concept, which is the idea, your basic idea, the skeleton of the story, and then you're going to need to flesh that out into the plot of your story, which is your premise. You want to know who your protagonist is, who your antagonists are, what's the point of the story, what's going to happen. You then go a little bit more deeply into that with your using your premise and your plot. You'd fill that in. The whole thing of plotting and pantsing is quite an issue with writers. But I mean, nobody can just sit down really and write a book without having some kind of idea of what they want to write. So very basically get that down first. So before writing your book, you don't actually have to have a title, although if you've got one, that's fine. You need to know more or less what genre it is, even though you can have different genres in one book. You need to have your premise, a basic plot, a basic outline. I don't suggest if you're writing your first book that you have some very odd point of view. First person point of view can be interesting. That's where the character is basically telling the story directly. I don't use this often myself, mainly because it limits the action to what the point of view character can see or feel or hear. If it's a diary entry, yes, that's wonderful. But as a whole fiction book, you need to maybe have written a book before you try that. Second person is a waste of time unless you're doing some kind of interactive book or playing games, because basically that's where the book's telling the reader what the reader does. So that's boring. Third person I do enjoy. I prefer to write a book where you can actually give the feelings and you can share internalized conflict and emotions and stuff like that. So, but that's definitely decide what your point of view is going to be before you start writing, because you don't want to chop and change that halfway through your book. Don't mess up your tenses. That's one other very important tip, because that can be very confusing for a reader. Past tense is generally what's used in fiction these days, but sometimes people do use the present tense. Don't ever use the future tense. That's just insane. I don't think I've ever read a book where the book is saying what's going to happen. I suppose there may be something prophetic, but not in fiction, no. Anybody can write a book, but it's, as I said, I mean, don't just think that you can write without learning a little bit. You'll need to know your basic grammar, but then again, that's another thing that's not necessarily an issue. I mean, there are so many writers that write that have no idea of, or they do have an idea of grammar, good grammar, they just choose not to use it. Stephen King often uses some very odd grammar, but that just makes his books more fantastic, because basically you can get into his characters' heads, whether they're swearing or drinking or falling down. So your three most important things in any book, really, I think, is your first sentence, which is your hook. That's where you get your reader to want to read more. If you look at some of the old classics like Lord of the Rings, I mean, the first sentence there, it hooks you. It says, when Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11th birthday, with the party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. So yeah, if you're into that kind of book, that's going to hook you. In Stephen King's It, his first paragraph says, "The terror, which would not end for another 28 years, if it ever did, began, so far as I know or can tell, with a boat made from a sheet of newspaper floating down a gutter swollen with rain." I mean, yeah, you want to read more of that for sure. So yeah, do think about your first paragraph. It's always good to have your protagonist or even your antagonist. It's good to have a person in the first sentence, if you can, rather than some kind of static scene setting. And that's another point of note, is that you don't want to go too indeed. You don't want to get your scenes too detailed, like, she walked towards the door over the grey carpet past the beige wall. Readers can imagine what's happening. So you need your title, if you have a title, or your general idea, your genre, your premise, your plot, your outline. You can, as I said, if you download all my notes, you can get a basic outline going over there. You need to know what's the point of your story, obviously. You need to know, theoretically, you should know the outcome. You should know what's going to happen at the end. Although that's not necessary. Please don't shout at me. I know a lot of people have no clue how their book's going to end while they're writing it, but you should have a general idea of what the outcome is going to be. But cliffhangers, I'm very fond of cliffhangers, but I only use them in short stories, because if you stick a terrible cliffhanger in a full novel, you're going to anger quite a few readers, so you don't want to do that. And as I said, every writer is different, and just like with an artist, no artist is born knowing how to draw, no writer is born knowing exactly how to write. They might have the stories perfectly in their heads, but to actually get them down is going to require a little bit of learning. And the best way to learn how to write a book is to read books. Read lots and lots and lots of books. And it's unlikely that your first book's going to be wonderful. Mine certainly wasn't. But you can work on it, and your second book will probably be absolutely delightful. And so the most important piece of writing advice for writing your first book is to just write the book and worry about the technicalities once you've done that. Obviously, we can't speak about every aspect of writing in this short video, but we'll get into them in the future. So if anybody has anything specific they'd like to talk about, please let me know. And do subscribe for future videos. Some of them will be about writing and writing thoughts, and others will be tutorials, how-tos, and so on. Again, if there's anything you'd specifically like to know, let me know. Thank you. Bye.